Hello, anti-novelists, Lilligans, friends, and onlookers. Welcome back to Zettelkasten for Fiction, where imagination finds order, the book that I'm writing for you to help you get your book written. Yesterday, I said that we would dig a little further into world building today, so let's get after it. I've pulled out a couple of cards that I'm using to write this world building chapter, which is proving to be very deep and crazy, but it's a great rabbit hole to go down, so let's go. My 7910 card says that the real world adds some new elements that are adjacent to our reality. The elements fit in reality, but with a twist. So, depending on what kind of world you're building, if you're building something off of the real world, you're just going to pivot the things that make your story fit into the real world, but with your own twists. These are hallmarked by things like contemporary fantasy, science fiction, some urban fantasy or urban magic stories. You'll recognize these as the real world, but with a slight twist. The second option to that is the real world, but with a shifted history point. Sometimes you can think of it as this world asks the question, what if? What if we never went to the moon? What if the Titanic never sank, right? So you're just taking history as we know it, and you're toggling it around. That's primarily where my novel sits, but we'll get back to that in a second. The second major option, aside from something that is real world, is an alternate world. An alternate world is just what it sounds like. It is completely new. This world operates independent of our collective experienced reality. It means it's something that you have entirely made up. Now, is it more difficult to write? Absolutely. But if you do it well and you are thorough and it all comes together, it is super cool and awesomely satisfying when it works. These stories tend to be epic fantasy, high magic series. There's a whole ton of school magic or things like alternate universes where many different kinds of creatures live together in harmony or in disarray. Could go either way. But an alternate world is something completely new and different. With that said, let's go back to my timeline. As I mentioned yesterday, my story is largely footed in the reality that we collectively experience as what is real. However, there are a lot of historical elements that I have toggled and twisted in order to hang the framework of my novel onto them. So let's look at a few. You'll notice on my timeline it starts at 1879 because that's when Marshall Branch, my main male character, is born. Going forward in time, I have given colored stripes to the elements that are from reality that inform my story. For example, in 1930, William Voynich dies. William Voynich wrote the Voynich manuscript. The Voynich manuscript figures prominently into my story. So that's one element where I've taken this book named after the man who discovered it and had it donated to the Yale Beinecke Library, and I've given that book a whole separate history and attributes of its own. So that's one example where I've taken reality, I've asked what if, and I've changed history. Here's another example. Yesterday I talked about Colonel George Fabian and how he founded Riverbank back here in the timeline where he founded Riverbank, right? So that's back around 1915, 1916. So as I'm following him through the story, and I make note that in 1936 he passes away, he's one of my bad guys. So I had to figure out, what is that going to look like? Well, as a result of him creating Riverbank, my main characters meet up with William and Elizabeth Friedman, who are two of the greatest code breakers of all time. And William Friedman becomes the college roommate of Marshall Branch, my main male character. So I'm taking historical figures and I'm weaving them in using the timeline to my own characters. That's how you get that done. So as you move forward in your story, you're starting to weave those elements together. As a second quick example, let's jump over here to 1872. In 1872, the School of Art of Needlework was founded, but I've noted the Guild is a proto-Royal School of Needlework. That's fiction. So I'm taking a real foundation organization and I'm hanging on it what I need in order for my story to work. So I have many, many examples of that as I move along my timeline. I'm taking the actual event. Here we have in 1900 the Glasgow School, which was a school that taught freeform embroidery. But I've made my own note that they were renegade in freestyle stitching. That's my world, but the real world is still the framework on which I hang the story. So as you start thinking about what is your story going to look like, you already know that I advocate heavily toward using a timeline. Use some kind of flowchart that allows you to see the reality as it exists, even if that's just your point of departure. Because if you're creating a completely second world, a completely alternate reality, that's okay. It doesn't hurt to start with reality as we know it and then start abstracting off of that the elements of your own world and how you want that to look. You can even switch up the timeline and change the way that time moves. That's absolutely okay, but you have to start somewhere. So I would advocate begin with some kind of timeline, start plugging in the events that you know, start plugging in your main character or characters, and then start building out that world. So this is just a super quick snapshot of the chapter, which is big, beefy, and chunky in the book, Zettelkasten for Fiction, on world building. But I want you to start thinking about just those high-level elements. Are you building a real world and just adding some new elements? Or are you not adding any twists at all? You're just building a story in the real world with maybe the suggestion of some alternates. Totally up to you. Or are you building an entirely alternate reality? Either way you go, you've got lots of options for building those things out. So determine which way you're going. Start making those first notes about those main characters and the kind of timeline that pushes them through their lives, and then start identifying and hanging on to that timeline the critical pieces that will be the breadcrumbs that pull you through that story. So, as I said, this was just a quick sneak peek. We're going to dive much deeper into this when we start looking at kinds of story and kinds of world building. So, I will see you in the next video. Thank you, as always, for your time. Get those words and ideas on the page, and we will keep working through them together. Thank you.